Good morning, everyone, and today we're checking out a brand new video from a channel called Postara. I have no idea if that's how you probably pronounce it, but today we're going to be checking out his video on the existential horror of the Russian sleep experiment. And of course, as you can probably tell, so if you don't want to watch this, you are free to click off, but for those of you that don't mind, let us begin. Graphic descriptions, disturbing imagery, and self-harm. You have been warned. Thank you for staying. Let us begin.
The Russian sleep experiment is an interesting creepypasta which delves into the idea of body horror and what it means to be human. While many other famous creepypastas at the time this came out chose to focus purely on elements of the supernatural or their own unique monsters or killers, this story instead chose to take a much more personal approach, exploring the idea of what would happen to the human body if sleep was no longer a necessity. The story
A horrifying concept, but still a damn good story.
goes as follows. In the late 1940s, a group of Soviet scientists had captured a group of war criminals and transported them to a covert research facility. The reason for this was because the scientists wanted to test an experimental gas which could seemingly remove the subject's need for sleep. The subjects were left in a small room, given their basic necessities, and were monitored day in
Food,
and day
water,
out
clothing.
to see what effects the gas would have on them. For the first 5 days, the subjects did not complain. The gas seemed to have very little effect on them, and they were happy to participate in the experiment under the false pretenses that after 30 days they would be set free. Following the first week was when the subjects began to display changes in their demeanor and personality. They became more paranoid and began recounting traumatic stories to one another from their pasts. Behavior which eventually culminated in them trying to win over the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades. All of this behavior was believed to be a direct result of the gas. 9 days into the procedure, one of the subjects began screaming violently and running around the chamber for 3 full hours, only stopping when his throat physically would not allow it any longer. The other subjects in the room would soon begin to show similar behavior, with some beginning to scream in a similar manner and others beginning to tear apart the books they were provided, smearing the pages with their own feces and using them to cover the windows that were used to observe them. And then...
Talk about shitty books. I'm sorry.
Within the next 3 days, the room went completely and totally silent. The experimenters had no way of knowing what was happening in there. They had no visuals, no audio, and yet the oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 test subjects were still alive. Seeing no alternative, the researchers attempted to communicate with the subjects to get a response. They spoke through the microphones, telling the subjects the doors would be opened and they would need to lie flat on the ground or else they would be shot. As well as this, they were informed that if they complied, one of them would be set free. Only one of the subjects spoke up in response, simply saying, "We no longer want to be free." After a lengthy debate amongst the researchers and military, it was decided the doors should be opened anyways and the subjects should be escorted out. The moment the doors were opened and the fresh air flooded in, the subjects began to scream out in agony, screams which overlapped with that of the soldiers who saw what had happened in the chamber. The room before them was a mess of gore and viscera, and the subjects looked like something out of a nightmare. They moved and appeared like living corpses, entire portions of their body ripped away to reveal their still working, exposed organs.
Think of it like a mix of John Carpenter's The Thing and anything from John Cronenberg.
The noticeable damage at the tips of the subject's fingers suggested that all the wounds were self-inflicted. The subjects would fight back against the soldiers who tried to escort them out, killing several of them and wounding several more. Eventually, though, they were successfully sedated and taken in for further research. The research done on the subjects raised many unsettling questions. One of the subjects, who had been given more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative, continued to struggle violently against the researchers until eventually bleeding out. His heart would continue beating a full 2 minutes after, despite that, and he spent his last moments thrashing about, screaming the word "more" over and over before falling silent. Those who survived were restrained, and operations were done on them to try and repair their bodies. Those who could still speak continuously begged for more gas, one slipping into a deep sleep which he never woke up from. Another, who could no longer speak, had surgery performed on him without anesthetic to avoid him sharing a similar fate. During the whole procedure, the subject was smiling ear to ear, and upon attempting to speak with his damaged vocal cords, the doctor had an assistant fetch a pen and paper for him to write on. The subject simply wrote, "Keep cutting." Once the procedures were done, the subjects were placed back in the chamber, and following another argument between those in charge of the project, the decision was made to put them back on the gas. In preparation for this, the subjects were hooked up to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. What was found when watching the monitors closely was that the subjects appeared to slip in and out of brain death. 1 minute they would be completely and totally gone, and the next they would be alive just as normal. One subject would end up dying completely before the gas could be let into the room again, and the commander who was in charge gave the order to seal the room with the gas while the researchers were still inside. One of the researchers, upon hearing as much, pulled out a gun, killing the commander and turning it on the subjects. He shot one in the head, killing it instantly, and then pointed his gun at the last remaining one who could speak. The researcher said, "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you.
No doubt.
What are you? I must know." The subject smiled at the researcher and said, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused at the subject's response before aiming the gun at his heart and firing. The subject died there, his last words being, "So nearly free." That was the Russian sleep experiment, and I have...
Like I said, it's a crazy-ass story, but it's damn a good story.
Quite a few thoughts about this story. Right off the bat, I feel it is immediately apparent that this is a very morbid story that for the most part relies heavily on its shock value and gore to be scary.
Definitely.
This was a common flaw in many old creepypastas from the early 2010s, and it is extremely prevalent here. Sometimes it feels as though the story lacks a lot of substance, with there being several full paragraphs dedicated entirely to the detailed descriptions of all kinds of gore and whatever else the author felt the need to include. Hell, I left out most of the descriptions this story gave because not only did they go way further than what I felt comfortable describing, but they also added quite literally nothing to the story. This major element of how the story is written was definitely a big turnoff for me, and is one of the reasons why this is not one of my favorite creepypasta stories by any means.
Even I have to agree. While it is a good story, it's not necessarily the best. So if anyone's actually a true fan of it, I'd be, well, surprised, nonetheless.
That being said, though, I do feel like there is a very good reason why this story is so iconic despite that, and it has to do with both the ending and the general concept it is built on. The Russian sleep experiment is terrifying because it proposes the idea that any person reading has the capacity to become the monsters shown in it. With that single ending line, we learn that these horrific creatures are not the result of the gas, but rather what the human body is capable of becoming if sleep is no longer a necessity. It is a deeply personal, existential horror that this story provides, and it may cause
humans unleashed
the reader to question the very reason why we sleep in the first place. I also find it incredibly fascinating how the story shows us this concept in a way that vaguely implies something supernatural is at play. Because on one hand, Your takeaway from the story simply could be the idea that this is the natural state the human mind enters if it does not require sleep. But that leaves us with a lot of questions. How do these
Go on.
subjects stay alive after their bodies have undergone such severe damage? Why do they only die once they've fallen back to sleep? What did the final subject mean when he said he was nearly free? All of those
That
questions
is a
remain
question.
unanswered when you view the story through that lens. But what if there was something supernatural going on? What if the ending is trying to tell us that there is something out there? Something completely unknown to us that is staved off only by our ability to sleep? What if
I
this
could see
thing,
that.
whatever it is, began using these subjects as its vessel, keeping them alive so long as they stayed awake just to revel in the terror and pain it brought? All of this is completely speculative. However, with how the story is written, it
Hmm.
definitely seems to imply this. And if this were the case, that final line of "so nearly free" is painted in a new, horrifying context.
Nearly
Regardless
free
of
of the
your
complex?
interpretation, it's all
Or nearly free of humanity?
those ideas that I feel make this a standout creepypasta. It may rely far too heavily at times on elements of shock value which do not ultimately add to the story, but it makes up for it by presenting a deeply disturbing concept which makes the reader question aspects of their life they never would have before. It is an internet horror classic, and I feel it will continue to be for a very, very long time. Thank you for watching.
Well, this was a pretty short one, being only about 11 minutes. But still, well, it's not bad for just a reading of a simple, basic creepypasta from the early days. Well, alright everyone, that's going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, so remember to support the original creator and all they do, and I'll see all of y'all next time when we flick back on. Till then, this is Fox, signing out. Peace.